The ventilation system wheezed, and a single flake of gray ash drifted past Fleet Dominar Threx Core's hexagonal eyes. He brushed it away. It was not his ash. The conclave spire smelled of ozone, and the chemical sweetener the Vorthari added to shared atmosphere. 9,400 years of recycled air. Threx had served here for 340 of them, and the smell still made his mandibles click. He stood at the observation rail of the tribunal chamber, looking down at the voting floor. 312 personnel had been stationed at Outpost Kappa 9. 312 were now listed as collateral administrative losses. The vote was 387 to 12. The Conquered had existed for 9,400 years. On this day it did what it did best. It overruled the quiet. Threx touched the voice modulator at his throat. The device stripped emotion from speech, rendering all statements as percentages and acceptable loss ratios. He had designed the setting himself. It made diplomacy efficient. Humanity's petition for censure is denied, he said. The chamber's translation systems broadcast his words across 4,200 species. The action at Kappa 9 falls within standard administrative correction parameters. The outpost was unregistered. The losses were proportionate. A murmur moved through the lower tiers, not protest, calculation. The delegates were doing the math. Threx turned from the rail. His prosthetic forelimb, the one he had earned pacifying Jor 7, caught the light as he moved. The ceremonial sash across his thorax was woven from the silk of 9 conquered species. He had added the 9th only last year. The weave was still fresh. He did not look at the human delegation. They sat in the observation gallery, a single row of 12 seats. One of them was empty. The representative from Kappa 9 had not arrived for the vote. Threx had made sure of that. I wish I could tell you the galaxy learned something that day, the record would later say. It didn't. Stay close. 3 days earlier, Colonel Sira Voss had been mapping dead sectors. She sat in the chart room of the EDS Resolute, her right index finger tracing coordinates on a glass slate. The finger was permanently ink-stained from decades of handwriting log entries. She wrote everything by hand first. It was a habit from her cartography days, when she had mapped 14 dead sectors and learned that the most important things were the ones you recorded yourself. The brass compass on her leather cord tapped against the console as she leaned forward. It no longer pointed north. It hadn't for years. She kept it anyway. Colonel, Lieutenant Janice Okonkwo's voice came through the comm. We have a priority signal from the Conquered relay. Voss did not look up from her slate. Origin. Conclave spire, tribunal chamber marked for your eyes only. She set the stylus down. The ink on her finger left a small smudge on the glass. She wiped it with her thumb, a gesture so automatic she did not notice she had done it. Route it to my quarters, she said. I'll take it alone. Her quarters were 4 meters by 3. She had lived in worse. The walls were the gray of recycled bulkhead, the bed was a fold-down shelf, and the only decoration was the compass, which she hung from a hook above her pillow. It spun slowly, pointing at nothing. She opened the signal. The footage was 47 seconds long. She watched it twice. The first time she noted the tactical details, the Vorthari fleet composition, the yield estimates, the crater dimensions. The second time she watched the faces. There were no faces. The Vorthari had recorded it from orbit. 312 names. She did not need to read them. She knew some of them. Petty Officer Ren Voss, 24, first deployment, kept a worn leather flight log. Sergeant Kira Tanaka, 31, adjusted a red thread bracelet her grandmother had tied 14 years ago. Lieutenant Janice Okonkwo had a daughter whose birthday was next month. He kept her photograph in his breast pocket. Voss touched the compass. It spun, she let it. She opened a secure channel, Wake the Ledger. The response took 11 minutes. That was the time it took for the signal to travel from the Resolute, 14 light-years from Earth, to the facility 12,000 kilometers beneath Luna's surface. The vault had no official name. The engineers who hollowed it over 9 decades called it the Quiet Ledger. It contained no ships. It contained no weapons. It contained 14,000 names, each with biometric precision, coordinates, and the exact force composition that had caused the loss. The ledger calculated. It did not forget. Voss received the confirmation on her slate. A single line, active, then a file, 41 words, 7 signatures, 3 extinct species as witnesses. Filed 287 years ago, the year humanity joined the galactic Concord. She read it aloud, though there was no one to hear. The right of proportionate response is not granted. It is recognized. It has been earned. The method of that recognition shall be recorded, calculated, and delivered with precision equal to the offense. She sat with the words for a long moment. The compass spun above her bed. The ink on her finger had dried to a faint blue. Then she stood. She folded the slate. She walked to the bridge. The Resolute was not a large ship. 32 crew, minimal armament. The Concord had classified it as a survey vessel, which was technically true. Voss had mapped 14 dead sectors in it. She knew every bulkhead, every weld, every spot where the recycling system wheezed. The bridge was a half-circle of consoles, dimly lit, smelling of ozone and old coffee. Lieutenant Okonkwo sat at tactical, his daughter's photograph propped against his monitor. Sergeant Tanaka stood at communications, her red thread bracelet visible below her sleeve. Petty Officer Ren Voss, no relation, though they had learned not to correct people, fumbled with the communications array while reading his flight log. All stations, Voss said. She did not raise her voice, she never did. We are changing course. New heading, Vorthari Prime, best speed. Okonkwo turned. Colonel, that's 12 light-years. I know the distance, Lieutenant. The Concord voted, Tanaka said. Her voice was steady, but her hand went to the bracelet. They called it proportionate. Voss looked at her. They called it that. We will call it something else. She walked to the main display. It showed their current position, a small dot in a field of nothing. She touched the screen. The dot moved, tracing a line toward a star she had never visited. The ledger is active, she said. That means we are no longer a survey vessel. We are a delivery system. Ren Voss looked up from his flight log. Delivery of what, Colonel? Voss traced her ink-stained finger across the display. The line grew longer. Justice, she said. The kind that takes 300 years to arrive and 9 minutes to deliver. The bridge went quiet. The recycling system wheezed. Somewhere a cooling vent clicked. Okonkwo turned back to his console. He did not put the photograph away. He placed it more carefully, facing him. Course laid in, he said. 12 light-years, 14 days at best speed. Make it 12, Voss said. I want to arrive before they forget the vote. She returned to her quarters. The compass still spun. She took it from the hook and held it in her palm. The brass was warm from the ship's air. The needle pointed at the wall, at the deck, at her hand. It had not pointed north since she had mapped the 14th dead sector and learned that some directions no longer existed. She thought about the 41 words. She thought about the 3 extinct species who had witnessed them. She thought about what it meant to be quiet for 287 years, to never vote against the majority, to let the galaxy think you were weak because you were patient. The ship accelerated. She felt it in her bones, a gentle pressure like a hand on her shoulder. She slept, she dreamed of ash. Gray ash, the color of old parchment, falling on a world she had never seen. On the 6th day, the coalition began to form. It started with a signal from the Tessari. Ambassador Ilan, 156 years old, bioluminescent skin flickering with anxiety, transmitted a simple message. We have received your invitation. We are coming. The invitation was not a threat. It was data. The ledger had sent every non-military species in the Concord a file, their own lost colonies, exact Vorthari fleet compositions, coordinates of Vorthari Prime, not as accusation, as information, the kind that made silence impossible. The Korvathi came next. Elder Korvas, 847 years old, throat sac scarred from a human lesson 400 years ago. He did not explain the scar. He did not need to. Every species in the Concord knew the story, though they had filed it under cultural anomaly. Then the Fennery, amphibious, translucent skin showing internal organs, communicating through pressure waves. Deep space miners, survivors of multiple administrative corrections. They knew what proportionate looked like from the ground. The Valen, the Serath, the Uloni. 6 species, 6 ships, unarmed, carrying only recorders. They did not form a fleet, they formed a witness. Voss watched their signals arrive on her slate. She sat in the chart room, the compass on the table beside her, spinning slowly. She did not respond to their messages. The ledger did not require acknowledgement. It required only presence. On the 10th day, Threx Corps learned they were coming. He received the report in his war room aboard the Vorthari flagship Unyielding Mandate. The name was new. He had commissioned it after Kappa 9, thinking it would be the first of many. The ship was 40 kilometers long, rust iron plating, 6,000 crew. It had cost the silk of a 10th species to build. He had not yet acquired that silk. 6 vessels, his tactical officer said. The Vorthari's mandibles clicked as he read the data. Unarmed, non-military registry, trajectory, Vorthari Prime. Threx touched his voice modulator, species. Tessari, Korvathi, Fennery, Valen, Serath, Uloni. The quiet ones, Threx said. He did not mean it as a compliment. Send a warning. Tell them they are approaching a military zone. Tell them to alter course. They have already responded, Dominar. They say they are not approaching. They are arriving. Threx's hexagonal eyes narrowed. For what purpose? Observation. They say they wish to observe. Observe what? The tactical officer's mandibles clicked faster. They did not specify. They said the observation would become clear. Threx stood. His prosthetic forelimb scraped against the arm of his chair, a sound like metal on stone. He walked to the tactical display. 6 dots, small, unthreatening, moving toward his homeworld at sublight speed. Destroy them, he said. Dominar, they are unarmed, non-military. The Concord Charter. The Concord Charter permits defensive action against unregistered vessels. Threx touched his voice modulator, adjusting the setting. Classify them as unregistered. Open fire. The tactical officer did not move. His mandibles stopped clicking. Dominar, he said. They are broadcasting on all frequencies. Live. Every species in the Concord is watching. Threx turned. For a moment the chamber was silent except for the ventilation system, which wheezed, and the distant hum of the engines. Then let them watch, Threx said. Let them see what happens to those who observe without permission. He did not see the ash that drifted past his eyes. It was too small. It was the color of old parchment, and it came from a ventilation duct that had not been cleaned in 300 years. It was not his ash, not yet. The Resolute dropped out of fold space 12 light-years from Earth, 14 days after Voss had changed course. She stood on the bridge, the compass in her pocket, the ink on her finger fresh from a log entry she had written by hand. The main display showed Vorthari Prime, a blue-white world, administrative districts visible from orbit, a fleet of 40 capital ships in defensive formation. 32 against 40,000. Ren Voss said. He was not being dramatic. He was reading the tactical display. 32, Voss corrected, and 1 ledger. She opened the shipwide channel. Her voice did not echo. The Resolute systems were too small for echo. This is Colonel Sierra Voss, Expeditionary Corps, commanding the EDS Resolute. We are on approach to Vorthari Prime under authority of the Quiet Ledger, charter filed 287 years ago, witnessed by 3 extinct species, signed by 7 admirals. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to calculate. She closed the channel. Open the broadcast, she said to Tanaka. All frequencies, live, let them watch. Tanaka's hand went to her bracelet, then she touched the console. Broadcast open. We're live, Colonel. Voss took the compass from her pocket. She held it in her palm. The needle spun, pointing at the deck, at the ceiling, at the display where Vorthari Prime turned slowly. Transmit the targeting solution, she said. Okonkwo turned. Colonel, that's identical, Voss said. Same yield, same coordinates, same math, the exact force composition that caused the loss at Kappa 9. The ledger does not threaten, it calculates. She looked at the display. The solution was already broadcasting. Numbers she had not chosen, coordinates she had not set, a yield she had not calculated. The ledger had done it all. 287 years of waiting, of recording, of calculating. 14,000 names. One answer. The Vorthari asked if Earth would send a fleet, she said. She was not speaking to the crew. She was speaking to the broadcast, to the 6 species watching, to the galaxy that had voted 387 to 12. Earth sent a mirror. The bridge was silent. The recycling system wheezed. The compass spun in her hand, pointing at nothing, pointing at everything. On the display, a timer began to count down. 9 minutes. 9 minutes to evacuate Vorthari Prime. 9 minutes for Threx Corps to recognize his own numbers. The ash began to fall. The timer on Voss's display showed 9 minutes. The broadcast was live. 6 species watched from their unarmed ships, recorders running. On Vorthari Prime, Threx Corps stood in his war room. The tactical display showed the same timer. He had not ordered it. The Resolute had broadcast it directly into his system. Block that signal, he said. We cannot, Dominar. The tactical officer's mandibles clicked 3 times, a pattern Threx recognized as fear. They are using our own targeting frequency, the one we used at Kappa 9. Threx looked at the display. The coordinates were his. The yield was his. The math was the math he had approved 72 hours ago for what he had called an unregistered outpost. He touched his voice modulator. Evacuate the administrative district. Priority, personnel, leave the records. Dominar, 9 minutes. Then move. The war room erupted into motion. Officers scrambled to consoles. Alerts screamed through the ship systems. Threx did not move. He stood at the center of the chaos, his prosthetic forelimb resting on the back of his chair, his hexagonal eyes fixed on the timer. 8 minutes. He thought about the sash, 9 species silk. He had acquired the first 300 years ago in the early campaigns. The 9th was fresh, still smelling of the creatures it had come from. He had planned a 10th. He had planned many things. 7 minutes. Coalition vessels are maintaining position, the tactical officer said. They are broadcasting on all frequencies, live. The entire Concord is watching. Shoot them, Threx said. Dominar, they are unarmed, non-military. If we fire on unarmed witnesses while the galaxy watches. Threx turned. His mandibles clicked once, a sound like a door closing. I said shoot them. The tactical officer did not move. The Concord Charter, Article 7, Section 4. Non-military vessels engaged in peaceful observation may not be targeted by member species without unanimous Security Council approval. The vote would take 11 minutes. Threx looked at the timer. 7 minutes remained. Then let them watch, he said. Let them see what proportionate looks like from the other side. He sat, the chair was cold. He had not noticed before. On the Resolute, Voss watched the coalition signals on her display. 6 dots, holding position, recorders running. She did not speak to them. The ledger did not require conversation. Colonel Okonkwo said, "The Vorthari flagship is not moving. No defensive posture, no evasive action." "They are calculating," Voss said. "The same way they calculated at Kappa 9. Should we?" "No." She held the compass in her hand. The needle spun, pointing at the deck, at the ceiling, at the display where Vorthari Prime turned slowly. "We wait. The ledger waits." 5 minutes. The broadcast from the coalition ships showed Vorthari Prime from below. The blue-white world, the administrative districts, the fleet in defensive formation. And one small ship, the Resolute, hanging in the void like a speck of dust. Ambassador Ilan sat in the Tessari vessel's observation deck. Her bioluminescent skin flickered with colors that had no translation. She was 156 years old, and she had seen 3 administrative corrections in her lifetime. She had never seen one from this angle. "They are not firing," she said to her recorder. "The Vorthari are not firing. They are sitting. They are waiting for the math to complete itself." Elder Corvus's voice came through the shared channel. His throat sac was scarred, and his words came out rough, like stones rubbing together. 400 years ago, a human taught me a lesson. I did not understand it then. I understand it now." "What lesson?" Ilan asked. "That silence is not absence. That patience is not weakness. That a ledger is a weapon more terrible than any fleet." 3 minutes. On the unyielding mandate, Threx Kor watched the timer. His war room had emptied. The officers had fled to evacuation pods, to shuttle bays, to any ship that could carry them away from the math. He remained. He looked at his prosthetic forelimb. He looked at his sash. He thought about the word administrative. He thought about 312 names he had never read. 2 minutes. The tactical display showed the Resolute's position. 32 crew, 1 ship, no fleet. The Vorthari had asked if Earth would send a fleet. Earth had sent a mirror. 1 minute. Threx touched the voice modulator at his throat. He turned it off. For the first time in 340 years, he spoke without the device that stripped his words of emotion. "She filed it under tomorrow's weather," he said. No one was there to hear. "She filed it under tomorrow's weather." The timer reached 0. The Resolute did not fire a weapon. The ledger did not need one. The targeting solution was already in the Vorthari system. It had been there for 72 hours, hidden in the same broadcast frequency Threx had used to coordinate the Kappa 9 strike. The Resolute had only sent the activation code. The sky above Vorthari Prime's administrative district turned the color of old parchment. Then it turned to ash. Threx Kor sat in his war room. The ash fell through the ventilation system, through the hull breaches, through the cracks in the ceiling. It was gray. It was the exact gray of the parchment on which the ledger had been written. It was the color of 312 names, of 14,000 names, of every name the Vorthari had ever called collateral. He did not run, he sat. The ash settled on his exoskeleton, on his prosthetic forelimb, on the sash of 9 conquered species. He watched the tactical display go dark. He watched the timer disappear. He watched the galaxy learn what proportionate meant when the math was identical. On the Resolute, Voss stood on the bridge. The compass in her hand had stopped spinning. It pointed at the display, where Vorthari Prime's administrative district was now a crater of gray. "Colonel," Tanaka said. Her voice was steady, but her hand was at the bracelet. "The broadcast is still live. The entire Concord is watching." "Let them watch," Voss said. She put the compass in her pocket. "Let them see what 287 years of silence looks like when it finally speaks." The bridge was quiet. The recycling system wheezed. The ash fell on Vorthari Prime, and the galaxy watched, and no one spoke. 3 days later, the conclave spire convened again. The ventilation system wheezed. A single flake of gray ash drifted past the observation rail. No one brushed it away. It was everyone's ash now. Ambassador Ilin stood at the witness podium. Her bioluminescent skin was dark, the colors of deep water. She held a recorder in her hand. She had recorded everything. The vote, the countdown, the ash. The Vorthari called it proportionate, she said. Her voice was small, but the translation systems carried it across 4,200 species. The humans called it the ledger. I am not certain either word means what we thought. The chamber was silent. 387 delegates who had voted to censure humanity now sat in their seats, looking at the ash that drifted through the air. The 12 who had voted against sat very still. Elder Corvus rose from his place. His throat sac expanded, a gesture of great effort. 400 years ago, he said, a human told me that the most dangerous thing in the universe is not a weapon, it is a list. I did not believe him. I believe him now. The silence held. Then a delegate from the Fennery, translucent skin showing organs that pulsed with pressure waves, spoke. The quiet ledger is not a human weapon. It is a human principle, filed 287 years ago, witnessed by 3 extinct species, signed by 7 admirals. We have all seen it now. The question is not what humanity will do next. The question is what we will do with what we have learned. Voss sat in the human gallery. She had not spoken. She did not need to. Her ink-stained finger rested on the arm of her chair, leaving a small blue mark. The compass hung from her neck, pointing at nothing, pointing at everything. A delegate from the Vorthari rose. Not Threx Kor. Threx Kor was dead. This was a younger officer, mandibles clicking with a rhythm that was not quite fear, not quite grief. The Ascendancy, the delegate said, requests a recess, to calculate, to understand. The conquered does not recess, said the session moderator, a Corvathi whose throat sac was scarred in a pattern that matched Elder Corvus's. The conquered observes, the conquered records. That is what we do now. The vote was called, not on censure, not on proportionate response, on something new, a motion to dissolve the administrative correction framework entirely, to replace it with a ledger of their own. The vote was not 387 to 12. It was 2,147 to 193, with many abstentions. The framework was dissolved. Voss stood. She walked from the gallery. No one stopped her. In the corridor outside, she met Ambassador Ilin. The Tessari's bioluminescent skin flickered with a color that might have been respect. You did not speak in the chamber, Ilin said. I did not need to, Voss said. My fleet spoke for me. But you have no fleet, you have one ship. Voss touched the compass, one ship. One ledger, one answer written in dust. She walked away. The corridor was long, and the air smelled of ozone and chemical sweetener, and the ash drifted through the ventilation system like snow. Ilin stood alone. She held out her palm. A flake of gray ash settled on it, the exact gray of old parchment. She understood every flake was a name. The ledger did not forget, it simply fell. When the ash settled, the galaxy learned that humanity had not been silent. They had been taking notes. The ash had not stopped falling on Vorthari Prime. 3 weeks after the vote, Ambassador Ilin stood on the observation deck of the Tessari vessel Witness, watching the gray settle over the administrative district. The crater was visible from orbit, a perfect circle, mathematically identical to the one at Kappa 9. The ledger had calculated well. The atmospheric processors are failing, her science officer said. The bioluminescent patterns on his skin showed stress colors, reds and yellows that pulsed like a heartbeat. The ash is not ordinary combustion residue. It is chemically active. It binds to oxygen molecules. The Vorthari are suffocating in their own air. Ilin held out her palm. A flake landed on it, the exact gray of old parchment. She had thought the metaphor was poetic. She was learning it was literal. How long? She asked. At current rates, the breathable atmosphere will be exhausted in 6 months. The Vorthari have evacuation capacity for perhaps 2% of the population. Ilin closed her fist around the ash. It crumbled, leaving a gray stain on her skin. The humans did not send a weapon, they sent a ledger, and the ledger does not stop at one entry. She opened a channel to the Resolute. Colonel Voss answered from the chart room. The compass on the table beside her had stopped spinning. It pointed at Vorthari Prime, 12 light-years away, as if the needle had finally found north. You are watching the ash, Voss said, not a question. I am watching a species die by accounting, Ilin said. The Conquered dissolved the administrative correction framework, but the ledger is still active. The ash is still falling. I do not understand how to stop it. You don't, Voss said. The ledger calculates, it does not negotiate. Then what was the point of the vote? What was the point of the witness? Voss touched the ink stain on her finger. It had faded to a pale blue, the color of old bruises. The point was to show the galaxy what the math looks like, not to stop the math. The math completes itself. Ilin's skin flickered with a color that had no translation. You are not cruel, Colonel. I have watched you. You are not cruel, but this. This is not cruelty, Voss said. This is proportion. The Vorthari called it acceptable losses. The ledger calls it identical force composition. The words are different. The math is the same. She closed the channel. Ilin stood alone on the observation deck. The ash fell on Vorthari Prime, and the witness recorded it, and the galaxy watched. 6 months later, the Vorthari ascendancy was no longer a military power. The evacuation had saved 40 million lives. The ash had taken 300 million. The numbers were not secret. The ledger had broadcast them, the same way it had broadcast the targeting solution. Every species in the Conquered knew the count. Every species had watched the math complete itself. The survivors settled on a moon of a gas giant in the outer rim. They called it New Mandate. The name was bitter, but they were too exhausted to be ironic. Threx Kor's successor, a young officer named Vex who had not been in the war room, traveled to the Conclave Spire. She wore no sash. The silk of 9 conquered species had been confiscated by the new coalition authority, along with the unyielding mandate and the voice modulator technology. I come to register a petition, Vex said. Her mandibles clicked with a rhythm that was not fear, not grief, but something older. The Vorthari ascendancy requests readmission to the Galactic Conquered as a non-military member species. We renounce the administrative correction framework. We accept the ledger principle. The session moderator was a Corvathi whose throat sac was scarred in a pattern that matched Elder Corvus's. He had died 3 months ago, age 912, with a human name on his lips. The moderator did not explain this. He only nodded. The petition will be recorded, he said. The calculation will begin. Vex stood at the podium. She was 2 meters tall, her exoskeleton the color of unpainted steel, her eyes still arranged in the hexagonal cluster that Threx Kor had possessed. But her left forelimb was natural, not prosthetic. She had not earned a replacement. She had not pacified anyone. I have a question, she said. Before the calculation proceeds, I would like to ask the human delegation. The human gallery was 12 seats. One was empty. The representative from Kappa 9 had never been replaced. The other 11 were occupied by diplomats Voss did not know. She sat in the back row, not as a delegate but as a witness. The Expeditionary Corps had not sent her. She had come herself. Colonel Voss, Vex said, you are not a delegate. But you are here. The chamber turned. 3,000 delegates, representatives of 4,000 species, looked at the woman with the ink-stained finger and the brass compass. Voss stood. She walked to the rail. She did not touch the compass. She did not need to. It pointed at Vex, at the podium, at the empty seat where a Kappa 9 representative should have been. "I am here," Voss said. "Why did you sit?" Vex asked. "In the war room, my predecessor, you broadcast 9 minutes. He had 9 minutes to evacuate. He sat. Why did he sit?" The chamber was silent. The ventilation system wheezed. A flake of gray ash drifted past the observation rail. Someone brushed it away. It was no one's ash now. It was everyone's. Voss looked at her hands. The ink stain was permanent. It would not wash off. She had tried in the early years, before she understood that some marks were not meant to be removed. "Because he recognized the math," she said. He had spent 300 years calculating acceptable losses. He had never calculated himself as one of them. When the numbers turned back, he did not know how to run. Vex's mandibles clicked. The rhythm was slow, almost thoughtful. "And you calculated the loss, you broadcast the solution, you watched the ash fall. Do you know how to run?" Voss touched the compass. It was warm from her body heat. The needle pointed at Vex, at the empty seat, at the ash that drifted through the air. "No," she said. "I do not run, I map. I mapped 14 dead sectors before I joined the Corps. I learned that some directions no longer exist. You cannot run toward a place that is not there. You can only record where it was." She turned from the rail. She walked back to her seat. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the moderator spoke. "The petition is recorded. The calculation will take 287 days. The Vorthari will be notified." Vex stood at the podium. She did not move. She watched Voss return to her seat, the compass swinging from her neck, the ink stain on her finger catching the light. "I have one more question," Vex said. "Not for the colonel, for the conquered." The moderator nodded. "The ledger principle," Vex said. "It is not a weapon. It is a method. It calculates identical retaliation. It requires no fleet, no army, no conquest. Only patience, only recording, only the willingness to wait until the math is complete." She paused. Her mandibles clicked once, a sound like a door closing. How many species in this chamber have records of their own administrative corrections? How many have losses they called acceptable? How many have names they never read? The silence was not empty. It was full of calculation. 4,000 species doing the math. "The ledger is not human," Vex said. "The ledger is anyone who keeps the count. The humans were simply the first to keep it for 287 years. The question is not whether the Vorthari deserve readmission. The question is who else has a ledger waiting, and how long they have been waiting." She stepped from the podium. The chamber did not erupt. There was no vote, no motion, no procedural call. There was only the sound of the ventilation system, wheezing, and the ash that fell through the air, and the quiet of 4,000 species calculating their own patience. Ilin stood in the corridor outside. She had not been in the chamber. She had watched from a monitor, her bioluminescent skin dark with colors that had no translation. When Voss emerged, Ilin stopped her. "You could have answered differently. You could have said the Vorthari deserved what they received. You could have said the math was justice." "I could have," Voss said. "But the ledger does not speak in deserve. It speaks in identical. The Vorthari are not punished. They are calculated. That is worse. That is forever." She walked away. The corridor was long, and the air smelled of ozone and chemical sweetener, and the ash fell like snow. Ilin stood alone. She held out her palm. The ash that fell on the conclave spire was not gray. It was white, the color of new parchment, the color of pages that had not yet been written. She understood. The old ledger was closed. A new one was opening. She opened a channel to the Tessari Homeworld. "Begin the count," she said. "All of it. Every administrative correction in our history, every name, every coordinate, every yield. We have waited long enough." The channel closed. She stood in the corridor, the white ash falling on her skin, and she smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a species that had learned to keep notes. On the Resolute, Voss sat in the chart room. The compass on the table pointed at Vorthari Prime, at the conclave spire, at the empty seat in the human gallery. She took a stylus and opened a new log. She wrote by hand, the way she always had, the ink staining her finger a deeper blue. Entry 1, she wrote. The Vorthari learned to count. The galaxy is learning to count. The question is not who has the ledger. The question is who has the patience. She paused. She thought about the 40 million saved. She thought about the 300 million lost. She thought about the empty seat in the gallery, and the daughter whose birthday photograph Okonkwo still kept on his console, and the red thread bracelet Tanaka still wore, and the flight log Ren Voss still fumbled with when he was nervous. She wrote, "The compass does not point north. It never will. North is a direction that exists only for those who have not yet learned that some places cannot be returned to." She closed the log. The ship was quiet. The recycling system wheezed. The ash fell through the void, gray and white, old and new, the color of names written and names waiting to be written. She slept. She dreamed of Kappa 9, not the attack, the before. The outpost as it had been, a small mining station on a dead rock, 312 people living ordinary lives, eating ordinary food, reading ordinary books, keeping ordinary photographs. She dreamed of Petty Officer Ren Voss's flight log, the pages filled with handwriting that was not her own, the words of a young man who had wanted to see the stars and had instead seen the math. She woke. The compass was spinning again. It pointed at nothing. It pointed at everything. Colonel Okonkwo's voice came through the comm. "We have a priority signal from the Concord relay." She did not look up from her log. Origin. New mandate, the Vorthari moon, marked for your eyes only. She set the stylus down. The ink on her finger left a small smudge on the page. She wiped it with her thumb, a gesture so automatic she did not notice she had done it. "Route it to my quarters," she said. "I'll take it alone." The signal was not footage. It was a voice. Vex's voice, stripped of the modulator that Threx Core had used, raw and clicking and strange. "Colonel Voss," the voice said, "I have been reading the names, the 312. I have read them all. I would like to read them to you, not as apology, as accounting. The ledger requires balance. I am trying to understand what balance means." Voss sat on her bed. The compass hung above her pillow, spinning slowly. The ink on her finger had dried to a faint blue. "Read them," she said. Vex began. The names were human, awkward in Vorthari mandibles, mispronounced, broken but spoken. Each one. All of them, the young man with the flight log, the woman with the red thread bracelet, the father with the daughter's photograph, the empty seat in the gallery. Voss listened. She did not speak. She did not need to. The ledger did not require conversation. It required only presence. When Vex finished, the channel was silent for a long moment. Then the Vorthari spoke again. "I have a question," she said. "Not about the past, about the future." "Ask it," Voss said. "How long will you wait? For the next one, for the next species that calls it administrative, for the next outpost that is unregistered. How long will the humans wait?" Voss touched the compass. It was warm. It spun. It pointed at the deck, at the ceiling, at the display where the stars turned slowly. 287 years, she said. Or longer. The ledger does not hurry, it calculates. She closed the channel. She lay on her bed. The compass spun above her, a small brass circle on a leather cord, pointing at nothing, pointing at everything. The ash fell, the galaxy turned, the names were spoken, the math continued. And somewhere in a facility beneath Luna's surface, a new name was being entered, a new coordinate, a new yield. The vault was quiet, the ledger was patient, the count went on. The vault beneath Luna had no windows. The engineers who hollowed it had not thought light was necessary. The names did not need to see. A single technician sat at the entry console. She was 23 years old, new to the post, and her hands shook as she typed the latest entry. The name was Vorthari, the coordinate was New Mandate, the yield was identical. She paused. She looked at the screen. 14,000 names above this one, 312 at the top in a font that was older than her grandmother. She touched the line. The ink was digital, but the gesture was old. She had learned it from her supervisor, who had learned it from hers, back through 287 years of technicians who had sat in this chair and typed these names and paused before each entry. "Is it right?" she asked. No one was there to answer. The vault was quiet. The ledger was patient. She typed the final digit. The entry locked. The system hummed, a sound like breathing. She stood. She walked to the center of the vault where a brass compass was mounted on a pedestal. It was the original, the one that had belonged to the cartographer who mapped the first dead sector. It no longer pointed north. It pointed at the display, where the names scrolled, where the coordinates turned, where the math completed itself in silence. She placed her hand on the compass. It was warm, it spun. It pointed at nothing, it pointed at everything. On the Resolute, Voss woke to the sound of the recycling system wheezing. She lay on her bed. The compass above her pillow had stopped spinning. It pointed at the bulkhead at a fixed angle she did not recognize. She sat up. She touched it. The needle was still. "Colonel," Okonkwo's voice came through the comm. Not urgent, quiet. The kind of quiet that meant something had already happened. "We have a signal from the vault. Entry confirmed. New name logged." She did not answer. She dressed. She walked to the bridge. The crew was at their stations. Tanaka at communications, her red thread bracelet visible. Ren Voss at the array, his flight log open beside him. Okonkwo at tactical, his daughter's photograph facing him. They did not look up as she entered. They knew her footsteps. "Display the entry," she said. The main screen showed a single line. Vorthari, new mandate, identical. "The petition was approved," Okonkwo said. 287 days. The conquered voted. The Vorthari are readmitted. Non-military status. Ledger principal accepted. Voss looked at the line. She thought about Vex, reading the names in her mandible-broken human. She thought about the ash, gray and white, falling on worlds she had never seen. "Course," she said. "Colonel." "New heading, new mandate." Okonkwo turned. "That's. I know the distance." He did not finish. He turned back to his console. The course line appeared on the display, a thin thread reaching toward a moon of a gas giant in the outer rim. "Best speed," Voss said. 12 days, Okonkwo said. "Make it 10. The ship turned. The stars shifted. The compass on the bulkhead above her bed spun once, then pointed at the new heading. North had been found, or something like it. She returned to her quarters. She took the stylus. She opened a new page. "Entry 2, she wrote. "The Vorthari learn to read. The galaxy is learning to count. The question is not whether the math is just. The question is whether we have the courage to read the answer." She paused. She thought about the technician in the vault, her hand on the brass compass. She thought about the empty seat in the gallery, still empty, still waiting. She thought about the ash that fell on Vorthari Prime, on the conclave spire, on the Tessari homeworld where Ilan was beginning her own count. She wrote, "The compass points now. I do not know where, but it points. That is enough." She closed the log. The ink dried on her finger, a deeper blue. 10 days later, the Resolute entered orbit around New Mandate. The moon was small, gray, unremarkable. The Vorthari settlement was a cluster of prefabricated domes on a plain of volcanic rock. No fleet, no weapons, no silk sashes. The survivors walked in the open, their exoskeletons dull in the weak light of the distant gas giant. Voss took a shuttle down alone. She wore no uniform, no insignia. The compass hung from her neck, hidden beneath her coat. Her right hand was in her pocket, the ink-stained finger curled against her palm. Vex met her at the landing pad. The Vorthari was smaller than Threk's core had been, her exoskeleton the color of unpainted steel, her eyes arranged in the same hexagonal cluster. But her left forelimb was natural, unbroken. She wore no sash. She carried a tablet, not a weapon. "Colonel Voss," Vex said. Her voice was raw, unmodulated, the mandibles clicking on the human sounds. "I did not expect you to come." "I did not expect to come," Voss said, "but the compass pointed, and I follow where it points." Vex looked at the compass. The needle spun, then pointed at the settlement, at the domes, at the Vorthari walking in the open. "It does not point north," Vex said. "No," Voss said. "It never has. It points at what is lost, or what might be found." They walked together across the plain. The volcanic rock crunched beneath their feet. The gas giant hung on the horizon, a vast banded disk, too far to give warmth, close enough to give light. "The names," Vex said. "I have read them every day, all 312. I mispronounce them, I break them. But I speak them." "I know," Voss said. "I listened." "I would like to show you something," Vex said. They walked to the edge of the settlement, to a dome that was larger than the others. Inside, the air was warm, recycled, smelling of ozone and the chemical sweetener the Vorthari added to their own atmosphere. The dome was filled with rows of tablets, each showing a name, human names, 312 of them. Some had photographs, some had recordings, some had only the name, spoken by Vex in her broken mandible voice, saved as audio files. "I am building a ledger," Vex said. "Not for retaliation, for memory. The Vorthari did not remember. We called them acceptable. We called them administrative. We did not call them by name. I am learning to call them." Voss walked among the tablets. She touched one. A young woman's face appeared, smiling, holding a child. The name was Tanaka, not Sergeant Kira Tanaka. Another Tanaka, a minor, a mother. A woman who had kept a red thread bracelet or not. Voss did not know. The ledger did not record bracelets, it recorded names, coordinates, yields. "This is not the ledger," Voss said. "The ledger calculates, it does not mourn." "I know," Vex said. "This is something else. This is what comes after the calculation, the question you asked in the chamber. What balance means, I am trying to answer it, not with math, with memory." Voss stood in the center of the dome. The tablets surrounded her, glowing, speaking in Vex's broken voice. 312 names in a language that was not their own, spoken by a species that had destroyed them, now trying to learn them. She took the compass from her neck. She held it in her palm. The needle spun, then pointed at a tablet, a name, a face, a voice. "She was 24, Vex said, reading the display. "First deployment, kept a flight log. She wrote about wanting to see the stars." Voss closed her hand around the compass. The needle pressed against her skin, a small point of pressure, a direction that was not north. "She did see them," Voss said. "We all see them. That is not the point. The point is whether we remember their names after we have used their light." She opened her hand. The compass pointed at the tablet, at the name, at the face. "I will leave this here," Voss said. She placed the compass on the pedestal beside the tablet. The brass was warm. The needle was still. It pointed at the name, at the face, at the memory that was not math. "I do not need it anymore," Voss said. "I have learned to find direction without it." She walked from the dome. Vex followed. They stood on the plain, the volcanic rock crunching beneath their feet, the gas giant hanging on the horizon. "Will you return?" Vex asked. "No," Voss said. "I will not return, I will go forward. The ledger continues. The count goes on, but I am done with counting, I am ready to read." She boarded the shuttle, the door sealed, the engines fired. The plane fell away, the dome shrinking, the gas giant growing vast and banded and indifferent. Vex stood alone on the landing pad. She held the compass in her natural forelimb, the brass warm against her steel-gray exoskeleton. The needle pointed at the settlement, at the dome of names, at the memory that was not math. She looked up. The shuttle was a speck against the gas giant. Then it was gone. She walked to the dome. She placed the compass on the pedestal beside the tablet with the young woman's face. The needle pointed at the name. It did not spin. It did not search. It had found what it was looking for. In the vault beneath Luna, the technician sat at her console. A new signal had arrived. Not a name. A message. From New Mandate. From a Vorthari who had learned to read. The message was one line. Spoken in broken human, mandible-clicked, imperfect but clear. "We are learning to count," it said. "Teach us what comes after." The technician paused. She touched the screen. The ink was digital, but the gesture was old. She thought about the compass on the pedestal pointing at a name. She thought about the ash, gray and white, falling on worlds she had never seen. She thought about the empty seat in the gallery, still empty, still waiting. She typed a response, one word plain, true. "Remember," she wrote. The system hummed, the entry locked, the vault was quiet, the ledger was patient, the count went on. But somewhere on a moon of a gas giant in the outer rim, a compass pointed at a name, and the needle was still, and the ash that fell was not gray, not white, but the color of brass in weak light, warm and patient and finally at rest.